As I was waiting for the show to begin, I looked down at my cup. It's a cup. It says United States of America, and underneath it, it says, "We the people of the United States." We the people, and people's emphasized. Boy, I feel like that used to be true, but it doesn't really feel like it anymore. Studies show that only 5% of the population shapes culture. 5%. That means 95% of us have been sitting around being dominated by people that want to ruin our country. Well, if you're watching this show, then that tells me you're one of the people that wants to do something about it. You want to shape culture. You want to make a difference. Today, we have a great show for you. I was recently with LANCE WALLNAU, and we had an awesome talk about the 7 mountains, and he told us an amazing story about how he got involved with the 7 mountains, and I can't wait for you to hear it. We're also going to be joined by a special guest. I'm going to introduce him to you when we come back. Thanks for joining the Sondra Heartstone Show. Check out HeartStone Network, a place where you'll find featured documentaries, testimonials, and great teachings by many of your favorites. It's a place that we hope will encourage you in your walk with Christ. While there, check out this series we have with Mario Murillo called I Am Not Ashamed. It's a great look into his past and how Jesus has brought him to be the man that he is today. Check us out, HeartStoneNetwork.com. I'm so happy you've joined us today. Hey, before we get going talking about the 7 mountains, I want to tell you about these amazing things we have. These are spiritual stakes. They have 16 Bible verses embossed on them, which is really cool. Now, what you do with these is you take them and you stake around the 4 corners of your property. Or you could even put these stakes in the 4 corners of your child's school. And when my son-in-law was very ill in the hospital with COVID, I went to the hospital outside the wing he was in, and I put these in the corners of the hospital building where he was in. I mean, anywhere. We want to declare that our country belongs to God and his word is true. So I put these on my property, on my 4 corners of my property of my home. I would encourage you to do that too. Hey, if you don't want to get these, go to Home Depot and make some stakes and write on them with magic marker or whatever verses you want. The thing about these embossed stakes is that scripture will never fade away, wash away with the rain or whatever. Anyway, they're on our site if you're interested, HearstStoneNetwork.com, and you just go to the shop. Well, I am very excited to introduce my new co-host on this show. This is Joshua Hicks, and I'm hoping you can tell because maybe he kind of looks like me. I don't know. Or maybe you look like your father. Anyway, this is my son. And Josh actually has a master's degree in maritime administration, and he was working down at the port when he felt God tell him it was time. He was called to the Media Mountain, and it was time to come work with me. And listen, I'm just having a ball. But today, Josh, we are going to talk about the 7 mountains, and we recently had an awesome interview with LANCE WALLNAU for a project we're working on. And a lot of people know Lance tied to the 7 mountains theory, and he's got an amazing story about how the 7 mountains came to be in his life, and we're going to share that with you in just a minute. But Josh, I just wanted to welcome you and tell us, what do you think about this 5% of the population being culture shapers? Seeing how it wasn't long ago you finished school, would you say that people in the school were shaping you?
Oh, yeah. It only takes a little bit to change the direction of everybody, right? Like a rudder on a ship. It's a small piece of wood, but it can move a whole big ship in a different direction. So that's really how it is. 5% changing culture. We have to be careful about who's in the wheelhouse controlling that 5%.
Did you have friends that you see their opinions and their views on the world's changed in a bad way because of the influence of teachers that were anti-American?
Oh, yeah. Many teachers in high school especially would preach their anti-American ideals and tell kids that America was nothing but a bunch of big, bad colonizers who wanted to just hurt everybody. It was really not good stuff. And then now we have a generation, we have all these 25-year-olds out there working, and we wonder why they're so screwed up in the head.
Wow.
Yeah.
I tell you, we have to do something as believers, as conservative people. You know, we've got to get out there and we've got to be culture shapers. I mean, we've got to be a positive influence. I mean, even today, we live in Texas, and just yesterday there was a border bill in front of our Texas congressmen to do something to stop the flood of illegals into our country. I'm not against people coming to America, but, I have to obey the laws, and I think people should have to obey the laws coming in. And I got a text from one person in law enforcement about all of the bad characters they're getting, like all the drugs that they're seizing and child molesters and everything else. So the laws just need to be obeyed. So, the fact that these people were able to shape culture, so to speak, because they stalled the bill. They messed it up so that it didn't even get to go to the vote because we had the majority, the Republicans would have passed it, and they kicked it out. You see how they're being an influence. They're being an influence that's destroying our country. So the good people, we've got to get out there and get in politics. We got to get into schools. We've got to be an influence.
I agree. Doesn't matter where you are. You could even wake up now. Even if you're working in a bank, right? Stamp in loans for houses, you can still be an influence for the kingdom there. Doesn't matter where you are.
So did you feel like you were an influence when you were working on the port?
For sure. I was seeing hundreds of people a week, thousands of people a week. I was able to interact with them in a positive way and treat people who may have a different background than me in a positive way. And I like to think that may have planted a seed or had a positive effect on them.
What? Treating people with respect? Oh, no, we can't do that in America anymore. I'm telling you, this country is becoming like so divided, so tribal. This is scary what's going on. I'm here to tell you.
With the loss in humility and the loss of respect for one another, it's just going to keep getting worse. My generation is so polarized. We have to come back together and agree on things.
I'll tell you what, we're going to show this this interview with Lance because I'm telling you his story. It just gave me goosebumps. And when we come back, we're going to have a heated discussion about this. I'm here to tell you. So let's roll that in.
The origin of the Seven Mountains is the unknown story. It's kind of amusing and almost unbelievable, actually, because it's become like a veritable cottage industry of Seven Mountain aficionados. They write books on them and they teach on them. And they're great guys, too. And some gals that are in this field. But the origin is interesting. Originally, the Loren Cunningham Youth with a Mission had the concept of 6 mind molders of culture. Loren had a problem with the business arena as the 7th, but his brother-in-law kept pushing him and saying economics is a field. And eventually Loren went with that 7th. But being a missionary and a Christian, he had a little bit of a discomfort about economics till his brother-in-law said, socialism, communism is much different than capitalism. And if you don't understand the ethics of the economics, you're going to miss a major sphere of influence. And so that was what finally made Loren flip, was when he realized there's an ideology, even a scriptural ideology attached to one's labor and the right to enjoy the fruit of their own contribution, not have it stolen from them by government. So, just wanted to say that, because then once Loren came up with those 7 mind molders of culture, Bill Bright, independent of him, Loren Cunningham, charismatic, Pentecostal background, Bill Bright, evangelical fundamentalist, Campus Crusade for Christ was one of the great organizations that went on campuses with Bill Bright funding it and his organization working it. I got saved from Campus Crusade, ironically. Seven Mountains guy. I got saved by Bill Bright. So his ministry was doing great work, but as he got older, he saw that the country was in a terrible situation. He did fasting and prayer, like 40 days of fasting for the Reagan era. And Bill Bright summoned the leaders who were funding youth, Campus Crusade. Imagine this, it's both youth organizations, Youth with a Mission, Campus Crusade. I thought it was interesting that both of these guys had a vision for where we are now. But the thing is, Bill brings these donors to him and says, look, you're in media, you're in Hollywood, you're in Wall Street, you're in banking, you've got influence with education. You need to look at these areas of cultural influence from the top down. While we're doing evangelism, you guys are gatekeepers, you're leaders. You need to influence your field and profession. And so they launched a thing called the Pinnacle Forum, which I thought was fascinating because the pinnacle is the top of a mountain. So, and that was almost launched at his deathbed. He gathered the men around him and made them commit that they would carry on the work of changing culture as well as evangelism. So the backstory here, Sondra, which fascinates me, is neither of these two camps would talk to each other. Youth with a Mission over here, Bill Bright over here, but they had a donor in common. It's funny how people with money and wealth can bring people together. It's fascinating. And the donor funded both of them, and he basically said, I want you two to get together. So reluctantly, the two generals had their meeting. And in fact, Loren Cunningham was out camping and seeking God when like a mounted police guy comes up to him with an invitation in paper saying, you're expected to go to a meeting. So he goes to meet with Bill Bright. Now, they don't really know what to talk about, but Bill Bright has this piece of paper with the seven it's the seven world kingdoms is what he called it. Cunningham was out seeking the Lord and was really writing down the seven mind molders of culture. And when the two of them took their scraps of paper out and compared, they had the same domains with different names. One had religion, the other had the church. One had academia, the other had education. One had politics, the other had government. One had news, the other had media. One had entertainment, the other one had arts. One had finance, the other one had business. They had literally both arrived at the same conclusion to one question God was wrestling with them. How to change the world, reap a harvest, and have the maximum impact on nations while the church is here to do that assignment. And they both came up with those. 7 world kingdoms, 7 mind molders of culture. Now, I didn't know that story. I discovered the story, and then after I told it, it kind of became like folklore because it's a compelling story. But it's only really interesting because the 7 mountains came along. And the 7 mountains is when the charismatic, revival, renewal, Pentecostal world got a hold of what Youth of the Mission and Campus Crusade were doing as inside shorthand. Now what happened there was I got a call from someone about Kim Clement. I traveled with Kim, tremendous prophet. And he had prophesied over a business guy in Conyers, Georgia, and in Georgia. The guy's name is Michael Krotz. Michael's running for state senator. He's a real estate business guy. Kim gives him a word that he's going to run for a political office. He's going to be in a political office. He's going to have a son named Caleb. His son Caleb is going to follow in the steps of his father. At this point, I don't think Michael Krotz had a son. And he was just thinking about politics, right? So this is a compelling word for a guy who's a business guy. Well, he ends up adopting a child named Caleb. He's 2 years old. He runs for office, and while he's on the campaign trail, he drops dead of a heart attack. He gets, taken into the hospital. After 15 minutes of trying to revive him, resuscitate him, he's got video footage of this, on a sidewalk outside a Marriott hotel or something. They get him down to the hospital. He's got another 10, 15 minutes of them trying to resuscitate him, and then a person comes out to Phyllis, his wife, and says, your husband's an organ donor. We need to have you sign off on removing organs because we haven't been able to resuscitate him. And she's a young Christian, you could say young charismatic at that point. And she wants to go into where the body is. And she goes in there. Now, Sandra, this is kind of interesting. She starts prophesying and praying over him. Where the Lord says that you're going to have a son named Caleb and he's going to walk in the same steps as his father Michael. You can't die. You haven't even walked in politics yet. This is interesting how prophecy, an unfinished assignment, is your greatest argument with death. That's the proverb here. She's prophesying the word. God said, she's a young Pentecostal. She's praying, God said you're going to walk. And so meanwhile, she's prophesying. The security in the hospital is coming to, they're saying, they got to get the delirious Pentecostal out of here. She's making a scene. Security comes and they're pulling her off the body, and she's fighting with security because she doesn't believe her husband's supposed to die. She can't believe an organ donor was just alive. Meanwhile, Michael Krotz is having one of the most extraordinary testimonies I've ever heard. It's like 25 minutes in heaven talking to Jesus. And listen, he goes on to serve for 4 consecutive terms in Georgia as a state senator. They had all kinds of nicknames for him because he saw Jesus and talked to him. And he's talking to Jesus, right? So he's having a conversation with Jesus, and he realizes that he's not going to be able to stay there, although he wants to, that he's got a job to go back. And his wife, Phyllis, in desperation, switches her strategy from prophesying to just commanding, like a good wife would do. Michael, come back into your body now. Bam! And at that moment, his spirit comes right back into his body, all the lights go up, beep, 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 beep. He's resuscitating, and the doctor, and this is weird, how unbelief is so interesting. A doctor who watches him after 30 minutes dead, coming back to life, instead of saying, wait, there's signs of life, he turns around and rebukes Phyllis for what she did. He goes, now you've done it. She goes, what? He goes, we'll be fortunate if we can keep him alive in a coma. He'll be in a vegetative state. He'll have lost half of his mind if he even comes out of this. He won't remember a thing about you or the past 30 years of his life. Now she's all freaking out because she's thinking, maybe she made a mistake. You think about how crazy this is, right? Oh, maybe I did something wrong. And she's picturing him in a wheelchair or something with oxygen tubes and doesn't know who she is. And, well, it ends up a day later. He's fully recovered. His mind is recovered. He's completely restored, and he runs for office and he wins, right? Now, what happened in heaven? I want to know about it. And I'm a bit like you at this stage. I got a camera crew, and I'm going to go down and interview him. I'm getting the scoop on this story, right? So I called Kim Clement. He says, talk to Debbie Orr, and she'll give you contact information for Senator Kratz, and I'll tell him I want him to give you access that, you could interview him. So I called Debbie, his secretary. And I said, Debbie, this is exciting. I need to contact the senator. She goes, yes, well, and then she tells me, catch this, Sondra. Then she tells me, here's what happened. While Michael was in heaven, he saw this ocean, this great body of water in front of him. And out of the water came 7 islands. These 7 mountains came up out of the water. And then a great mountain emerged in the background of the other 7. And the Lord said, those 7 mountains are 7 world kingdoms, and that mountain is the mountain of my kingdom, which is greater than all the kingdoms of this world. She said, and then the Lord spoke to Michael and said, Michael, that mountain is the mountain of government. And he pointed to one in the middle. And you are called to go into it, but there must be agreement, Michael. And at that moment, Michael submits to the will of God. And he knows he's about to be summoned back into his body. And he's back in the body. And next thing he knows, he's coming to consciousness. And he's feeling pain in his body, too. He said he knew in heaven it was going to hurt when he went back. That was another thing. He said he knew it wasn't going to be comfortable. He had left his pain into heaven, and he knew he was going back to a world of suffering. He said, I even knew physically it was going to be uncomfortable. So, boom, he's back in his body. I can't wait to interview him. So I get to him, and I say to him, tell me about the 7 islands that became mountains, and the Lord saying, and that's the mountain of government you must go in, and the mountain of my kingdom is greater than all. And he's staring at me. He goes, I don't remember. He said, I'll tell you this. The Lord told me I was going to have experiences that I would not recall. I would recall part, but not everything of what he showed me. But he would reveal to me the part I needed to know about. He said, I don't recall that. He said, now the Lord showed me a body of water and all these spheres, these circles of spheres that appeared. And then I saw people in their occupations. And the Lord showed me that in the end there would be great shaking and that people would arise in their circle and sphere of influence. And that it was primarily through their employment and work and profession that they would dominate and demonstrate the kingdom in that area, and that would be stability. And I got the impression people would be coming on to those circles of stability out of the chaos of shaking, and the kingdom would expand. He said, but I don't quite remember that. Well, I was mortified because before I went down, I had just done Randy Clark's first Voice of the Apostles conference in Harrisburg. Heidi Baker, Leif Hetland, Randy Clark, Bill Johnson, and I happened to have been speaking there, and I told my mom on my way to Atlanta, Georgia, I'm going to go interview him, and I told him the story the way I heard it. And this is the strangest thing. You can believe it or not believe it. I did my first 7 mountains on a whiteboard story. This is what happened. And I said, you remember the movie Gladiator? At the end of Gladiator, Maximus raps, they have to stand up against the chariots coming in, and he has them lock their shields. And I believe this movement is a movement that's coming in the last days. Whatever hell sends through those gates, we have a better chance to survive if we work together. We have a model how we have to move together. Lock your shields. Everyone stand up, put your right hand up in the air, and bring your hand down and say, as one. And they brought their hand down and said, as one. And as they said it, there was an as one that echoed from the angelic realm right on top of it. So it was as one, as one. It was like boom, sandwiched on top of it. Half the room knew it was angels. The other half thought it was an echo. But I went back to that moment and tried to repeat it 20 times with the same group. And I could not get the phenomena. It was only the first time we ever did as one. It was though heaven said as one. So I'm on a roll going down to Michael Krotz. I'm convinced that I've heard from heaven and God's given his seal of approval. When I get down to Michael and find out that he doesn't know what I'm talking about with these mountains, I'm thinking, what? I called Debbie. Debbie, I'm interviewing Mike Krotz down here, and I called you up and I talked to you about the what happened. He doesn't know anything about mountains. He doesn't know anything about, that you must be agreement. Everything. Where'd you get the story from? She goes, Dr. Lance, in fact, I have my honorary degree. Dr. Lance, I don't mean to be rude, but you didn't talk to me. I said, Debbie, I called you and you told me this. That's my notes. That's why I went down, preached this message in Harrisburg. She goes, Doctor, I'm not saying you're lying. I'm just saying you talked to someone, but it wasn't me. I said, well, who else could it have been? Then I got these goosebumps. I thought, you don't remember this? She goes, I'm sorry, we did not have that conversation. So if you want to know the strange origins of Seven Mountains, that's the actual inception point, because that's when I started talking about it. And then I don't doubt that other people have the same revelation, got the same revelation. They even got the same sequence of mountains. But I don't think most people know the story. So Mike Krotz, Senator Mike Krotz, hadn't talked to him till this July, August. I was in Aruba. Hadn't talked to him in about a year. He calls me up before I went on vacation. And I took a couple weeks with Annabelle. And I get this urge to call him back. So as soon as I get to Aruba, Annabelle and I get settled in, unpacked, I call him up. And he said, I just want to tell you, I believe that Seven Mountains vision that you had, I think that happened. He said, the Lord told me I wouldn't remember everything, but I am convinced that Seven Mountains is the revelation God gave me in heaven. That's the revelation. You've got to write and get that message out. And I said, well, Mike, if really it's your experience. He goes, no. He said, I know it's my experience, but you saw it and you heard it. And as I've been reading and listening to you, I realized this is the essence of what Jesus was showing me in heaven. This is the movement. 24 hours later, I get a call from Donna Clement, Kim's daughter, crying. She is beside herself. Mike Krotz has died. Finally, the Lord called him home. And she said, he's gone. Our friend Mike. I go, well, I just talked to him yesterday. What are you talking about? She goes, I'm telling you, Phyllis called me and he just went to heaven. He actually called me a day before he went to heaven to tell me, almost like to urge me, get the message out, it's time. So that's the reason why I wanted to tell you the story. That was just like this year. So I felt like he literally had the urge to call and get me to know this is what I saw, this is what has to happen. And gone.
Check out Heartstone Network, a place where you'll find feature documentaries, testimonials, and great teachings by many of your favorites. It's a place that we hope will encourage you in your walk with Christ. Check us out, HeartStoneNetwork.com. Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed Lance's story about the Seven Mountains. It was pretty amazing, isn't it? The Seven Mountain Mandate is something that we take very seriously. I'm called to the Media Mountain, and to that end, we are working on a documentary that we're calling America's Identity Crisis. It's about a lot of things that's going on in America, but it's stories of people that are finding their mountain and climbing it and making a difference. Kind of some of the unsung heroes, if you will. And we've been going out interviewing people now for several months, and we've been learning a lot. But, Josh, I thought what we might start with is, why don't you just share some of your story? You went to college, and you actually have a master's degree in maritime administration, and you were working in the port, and God spoke to you. So tell everybody your story.
Yeah, so growing up, obviously, some of my earliest memories are on set, training videos, running around with you all over the state, working on documentaries, right? So that's always been there. And then as I got older, we did a couple trips to Africa and all that, working on documentaries like Walk With Me, right?
Yeah.
After working on that, one time I got back to school. and someone said, "Hey, you know how to make videos, right?" And I'm like, "Sure." I didn't really know what I was doing there, but I said sure and made a couple organization videos. And then a few months later, I get a call from the school.
This was Texas A&M Galveston.
Texas A&M Galveston. I get a call and I see it's one of the school's
I'm sorry.
numbers.
Is it okay for me to say A&M without going whoop or whatever y'all do down there?
Oh yeah, no, you can't say that. So
Oh, you have to be a graduate?
You have to be in the cult.
Pardon me.
To be a part of the cult.
Pardon me.
I don't know. I guess you paid enough for it. So.
No, that's right.
So I get a call from the school, and this lady goes, "Hi, Josh, I'm so-and-so, and we saw some videos you made for organizations. We want to hire you to be the team lead of the media group here. Are you interested?" And I'm like, job? Sure. Yeah. What? You know, this was 10 o'clock in the morning. I'm in college, so it kind of woke me up, right? But I go meet with her like 30 minutes later, and they tell me they want someone to run around and follow the COO of the school around and just follow him with a camera. And I was like, yeah, sure, I can do that. So did that for a while.
Now, wait. The COO, is he the guy that was the former astronaut?
Yes, former astronaut.
Colonel?
Yes. Colonel Mike Fossum.
He's the guy, did he live in the space station?
Yeah, he spent a lot of time in the space station doing
Wow,
spacewalks.
You get a job following that guy around?
Yeah, it was pretty fun.
Man.
Got to hear some really cool stories of him. So from there, I take an internship moving freight around the world for a few months, and I was like, okay, this is boring. I'm leaving this.
Wait. So what happened after your video job?
After my video job. So
because you graduated?
No, it was the end of the school year, and so I took an internship for the summer.
Yeah.
Moving freight.
Yeah.
And even in that interview, they're like, we're looking at your resume. Why aren't you working in video? Why do you want to come be a freight forwarder? And I'm like, because I need an internship. This sounds more fun, lying to them and myself, of course. So I do that for a while, and it really stinks. And I tell this lady I work with, I'm like, hey, I'm quitting today. And she goes, oh, good, I'm glad. I was waiting for you to quit. And I'm like, what? She goes, yeah, my husband runs the company that trains all the longshoremen in Texas, and they want someone to come in and start making training videos for them. And I was like, oh. And she goes, yeah, I showed him the stuff you did for the school, and he really liked it. So here's his number. Call him when you're ready. So that turned into that next job. I worked there for 2.5 years, did all kind of things, became a Josh of all trades, working on all kind of stuff. And then it's been about a year since I left. This part of the story.
Well, tell everybody what happened. Why did you leave?
I started getting a growing feeling inside of me that it was time to go. It took me a few months to kind of see enough to work up the courage to leave. And I really felt that it was time to come over to Heartstone and really get behind a camera more and start telling stories. And
now, was this a spiritual decision? Why? What happened?
I felt God pulling on my heart, tugging at me, saying, it's time to go, make the step, take the step.
Did you say, no, not with my mother?
Sometimes, a little bit. It's difficult, It was difficult to make that step.
I bet.
And started moving forward, and I was, I'd start to quit, and then I'd get cold feet, and I'd go back and forth, back and forth. I think my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, she was starting to go crazy and was like, make a decision, please. It's good to have a woman in your life to direct you on these things.
Every man needs a woman in their life to give them guidance. That's what I'm saying. We're the brains of the outfit. That's what I've been telling your father for years. Now, Josh, I had this idea I had this idea, I think, back in the fall, that we needed to do a story called America's Identity Crisis. It's not about sexual identity. It's about the dark side trying to steal America's history. And the way this came about is, that was just it. I decided we need to do that. And we had some people that said, hey, we like that idea. We'll back it. So we started doing it. But, we went to a meeting to meet with a man who had written some books on U.S. history. And we had coffee. And, I was going fast. And you told me later that in that meeting was the first time you ever heard that our founding fathers were not deist. Mm-hmm. Well, first thing that happened was I thought, what a horrible mother. How did you not know that? How did I make sure you did not know that? And I think I just assumed that because you lived with me, you knew all these things I didn't know. And I'm telling you, I went, oh my gosh, this story needs to be about a 25-year-old man who realizes he was lied to in school and he goes out to find the truth. So based on that, tell us some of the lies that you now realize you were taught in high school, in junior high, and in college. Let's start with that.
All
like
right.
what?
Here's the big one that was busted in that meeting with Eddie that day. And then I read his book. And
Eddie, that's the man we were having breakfast
Yes.
with that day. Yes.
Yes, this busted this story wide open in my head.
Okay.
So sitting there talking about the founders, talking about their faith. And I was like, okay, I haven't really heard this perspective before, but it sounds right. In my spirit, it feels right.
Yeah.
This sounds right.
Yeah.
And he starts explaining how they were men of God, how a lot of them were men of the cloth that were leading regiments of people, and they were trying to set up a nation that had liberty, that was biblically based with liberty. Now, I had learned, at least in the political science classes in college, was where this was really put in my head, was that our founders were all bootleggers, smugglers, and kind of like career criminals, like leaders of...
That's what you were taught in school about our founding fathers?
I don't know if it was necessarily taught. Well, it wasn't directly taught in the books that way, but the professors I had painted them in that picture.
Oh, wow.
So to an impressionable 18, 19-year-old, you're hearing, oh, yeah, the founders, they were all kind of like, like these Mexican
Scallywags.
gangs, right?
Oh, my gosh.
They're like running criminal enterprises, and they wanted to set up a government so they could protect themselves and their assets because the British were coming in trying to keep them from being criminals.
Wow.
And so I was under that impression
So
for
did
years.
you actually have teachers that you felt despised America?
Oh, yeah.
You got to be kidding me.
Oh, yeah. College wasn't
How much did
too
I pay
bad,
for
but-
this?
Well, where it was bad was high school.
What?
Public high school.
How much
here
were my
in Texas.
taxes again?
Yeah.
You got to be kidding me.
I have a clear memory. There's a teacher. I always debated her because she drove me up the wall. And, at 16, I was reading Glenn Beck books and watching Fox
You old
News.
conservative, you.
I'm horrible, right?
How can you read a Glenn Beck conservative book and not know the founding fathers were Christians?
I know, right?
God.
I think college infected my brain a little bit, even at a conservative school. So
I want a refund.
this world history teacher I had, advanced placement world history teacher, would sit there and just go on rants and talk about how terrible America was and how we're really not good. We're just evil colonizers and really not a good place. And it really bugged me a lot because her parents were immigrants who left a country in the Caribbean to flee from...
And I bet if you talked to her parents, they'd say America was wonderful.
Exactly.
Brat. And that was 9 years ago. Can you imagine how much more worse it is now?
Oh, yeah. It drove me crazy.
Oy vey.
And she'd sit there telling us why abortion needed to be allowed and good for everybody and how gun control needed to be implemented. And I was the only one who would fight back against her. And it actually spurred me on to read more literature about how to argue against her because this is a grown woman sitting there giving her ideas to a group of 16-year-old kids who should not be basing their political ideology off of this one person. They need to be learning that at home and on their own. School is not a place for political ideology to be pushed on children and to teach it to them. They need to learn facts, history, X, Y, Z.
Well, we talked about that last week in our podcast that reading, writing, and arithmetic, that's out the door, dude. That's not what they're doing. And then our friend Dan Smithwick came on and talked about the biblical worldview. And, he studies Christian children raised in a Christian home. What's their worldview? And the 87% of our Christian children are in public school. And the worldview is down in the socialist number. They believe that they need to be cared for, taken care of. I'm telling you, we are killing the spirit in our kids to go out and achieve and to be great and to be visionaries. We're just killing them. Well, Josh, tell me, we recently got back from Washington, D.C. and Virginia and Philadelphia, where we were shooting for this documentary. We've also interviewed like Greg Hood, Lance Wallnau, and many other people. Tell me some of the things you've learned. How has this changed your thinking? And give me some examples if you can.
For sure. So when we met with Greg Hood, if you're a longtime fan of the show, you'll have seen some interviews we've rolled in with Greg from...
Yes, he wrote the book. heaven. It's about, what is it? Unlocking God's kingdom, or
The kingdom of the gospel.
oh yeah, the kingdom of heaven. The kingdom
Yeah,
of heaven.
the
Yes.
kingdom.
Oh man, that book rocked my world. Kingdom of Heaven. You can get it on our website if you don't know where to get it, but it's called Kingdom of Heaven by Greg Hood, and it's off the chain. So tell me about your time with him.
So I had read his book as well and sat down and talked to him, and he kind of helped make more sense of what I had read. That book was very encompassing of some new ideas, or maybe even ideas I'd heard, but it really cemented them in to understand how we are living in a kingdom, and because we are from a free republic, we may have some hard ideas understanding how a kingdom works.
Mm-hmm.
So this explains
Oh,
how...
you mean because like if we lived in England, we would get the king and queen business.
Right, we would get it a little better.
Okay.
But, there's a lot
We
of...
don't have a king.
We don't have a king, as we're told. Maybe some oligarchs, not a king.
We have criminals. Does that count? We do have criminals in office.
Yes, maybe not 250 years ago, but now we do.
Yeah.
Anyways, Greg talked about how in a kingdom, how everything belongs to the king. And we're there to serve the king. And he will give us what we need and puts us on assignments, and we follow the king's direction. And I was like, okay, I've kind of heard this, but it painted it in a better light to make more sense. Because Greg considers himself just backwoods, good old boy, Tennessee kind of deal, right? He's got a southern drawl. He talks like this. He definitely in November sitting out there with this 30-06 in the deer stand,
Well, let me just tell you, just to pay tribute to Greg, how about if we just roll in a clip of a conversation you had with Greg so everybody can feel Greg and you understand what we're talking about. Watch this.
Because God manifests himself in structures that he created. He does not manifest in something that he did not create, even though we beg, even though we cry, even though we give sacrificially. God's not obligated to do that. Kingdom is the structure that God said he would manifest himself in. We're seeing people healed in government buildings, in school buildings. We're seeing people healed in hospitals. We're seeing people delivered in all walks of life. We're seeing people saved on the street, coming into the kingdom of God on the beach, in these areas that are outside of the religious structure. And people that are in these structures are saying, this can't be God. But brother, it's all God. Why? Because God is pulling people into himself through these methods that are they're not traditional. They're not the things that we said he manifests himself in. If you look at the scripture, every time Jesus went in the temple, he got in trouble or he caused trouble. Why? Because religious structures could not hold what Jesus was bringing.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that. You can see he's a good old boy, down to earth, just full of so much wisdom. But this is actually the book. It's called The Gospel of the Kingdom. And I am telling you, you will not regret reading this book. It's one of our favorites. It is amazing. And he writes just like he talks. So it's real easy to read and it's fun. He is I just can't say enough about Greg Hood and this book. So anyway, if you want to get a copy, it is on our site, HearstStoneNetwork.com, or you can probably get it from Amazon too. If
If you want to support the show, get it from HearstStone Network.
If you do want to support Greg, if you get it on our site, it will support Greg, because Amazon keeps just about all the money from any products you sell on there. But that's Amazon. Anyway, so Josh, now another interview that you had so much fun at was with J.R.
Oh yeah,
Fitch. J.R. is a very successful. He's a financial advisor down in Chattanooga. I'm telling you, that guy, has he got a personality and a half or what?
he's actually right here.
No, let's play an excerpt. You were actually a guest on his podcast, and
the Kingdom Business podcast. You can find that on HearstStoneNetwork.com.
Yeah, but I want you to tell them a little bit about what you learned before we show them JR.
Yes. So, sitting there on their podcast, him and his co-host LZ. He. My mother always
buying
has
books
to
send
correct
him to
my
school.
grammar.
That's right.
This is the modern education system.
Well, I'm here to teach you grammar. It's he and his friend. All right, go ahead.
So JR and LZ, the host of this show, I start asking them about advice people in my demographic need to know, right?
Yeah.
And they start talking about worship. That's one of their big things they're always talking about is worship. And they're talking about how when you're doing what God has called you to do, that's worship. That right there is one of the truest forms of worship. Of course, being in church Sunday, raising your hand, singing, that's good. That's good worship. It's a good aspect to have. It's a healthy balance. But true worship is doing what he calls us to do and doing it faithfully with him in mind. And they told me, they said, us sitting here doing this show, we believe he directed us to do this show. Us sitting here doing it, that's worship, dude.
We're going to play you a clip of these guys because you would enjoy their podcast too, which are we now hosting that on our site?
We are hosting it on our site.
Yeah, what is it called?
The Kingdom Business Podcast, available on HearstStoneNetwork.
Are you auditioning to be the narrator of the show? I'm telling you, it sounds like you're auditioning to be the narrator of the show.
Well, I listened to JR enough where I learned how to do this radio voice kind of thing. It's really
welcome
good salesman.
to the JR show.
So if you're called to be, if he created you to be a filmmaker, right? And I don't know that that's what he created you to do. I think you believe that's what he created you to do. If that's what he created you to do, or if that's what he created you to do in this season, then when you're making films, you're worshiping him.
Yeah. Wow. That changes things, bro.
Because it's not 3 fast songs and 2 slow songs on the commute to work in the morning. It's no. When I'm setting these cameras up, I am creating.
Yeah.
I am worshiping him, and through that act of worship, he then has authority to inhabit that and breathe on it.
Yeah.
Because you have to view it as I'm actually operating in who he created me to be, which is my reasonable service, my worship.
When we were setting up cameras beforehand, JR points at the camera and he goes, when you're setting that camera up, pulling the tripod out of the bag, that was worship.
Well, it is because we're doing it for the kingdom.
Exactly. And he just paints a picture of all these examples of everything.
Yeah. You know what was so great? You know what I would say is so phenomenal about JR? He loves Jesus with all his heart, and that boy's got no religious bones in his body. Are funny. Oh my God. That guy, he did a shoot. We are working on a show about Ezekiel, and he played Ezekiel. When you see him, well, here, let's look at this picture here. This is him on the set playing Ezekiel. That guy, he had us laughing so stinking hard. He is so, in fact, wait. Before we play the podcast, I'm going to show you the commercial he shot for us out on, what was that place we went to?
Fredericksburg, Enchanted Rock State Park.
We were at the top of Enchanted Rock up on this thing. And yes, this old lady got up there. I almost had to be life flighted down, but I had to get up there. Anyway,
I carried her, don't worry.
I want you to hear this commercial JR did.
HeartStoneNetwork.com, where dry bones come to live again.
You see what I'm talking about? That guy was so funny. He just, off the cuff, just like that. Woo, woo, woo. Anyway, we started the show with that interview you did with Lance Wallnau. What do you've known Lance a long time. Lance has been a buddy of ours for, I don't know, about 15 years. Tell me what you thought interviewing Lance and that story he had to tell and the other things he had to say. Because, he's considered he's a great thought leader.
He is. So backstory on that, right? I went to all those 7M Gen camps that he hosted.
That's right.
For teenagers and young adults.
The Seven Mountain
Generation
yeah,
camp,
that's right.
So
okay.
We learned a lot there about being leaders and how to shape culture and what you need to do to be that 5%, right? I think I like to attribute some of that to where I am now.
Really?
Those seeds are planted, they're going to grow as that tree
Now, don't
grows.
tell Lance you're going to give him credit for your life because I want all the credit.
Deal.
Okay. Okay, your dad gets a tiny bit of credit, but it's mostly me.
Okay.
Not really.
Well, that interview we did with him, right, as we all just heard, he was talking about the inception of the 7 mountains, right, and that whole principle, teaching. It painted it in new light. I hadn't heard the story told in a while.
Wasn't that amazing?
It was amazing. I hadn't been around him in years, so it was good to go see him and hear from him and hear that story again.
And when he told us that story, that man had just passed away like the week before.
Yeah,
so
it was recent.
It was fresh, hot off the press.
Yeah. So that kind of helped paint a good light on the 7 mountains, and I think it's helping us in our direction on America's identity crisis. To realize, this really is 7 mountains. And
God had to have told him to call Lance to say that because God, of course, knew he was going to go to heaven the next day. I mean, it just gave me chills when I heard that story. The 7 mountains are family, education, government, business, arts and entertainment, media, and religion.
And now science is thrown in there in the mix.
Well, I think they ought to merge media and entertainment all together and do science. But anyway,
I think they did.
I think they used to say science and medicine was part of government. But anyway, it's really fascinating, and I do want to encourage everybody, investigate it and find your mountain. Everybody has a destiny. Everybody is called to someplace. And if you're a homemaker, it's the family. And if you're a pastor, it's religion. We're in the media mountain, but everybody has a place. Don't you think?
Oh yeah. Even if you're in the shipping business, right? If you're helping move cargo around the world, you have a sphere of influence there. You're in business.
Yes. Everyone is a sphere of influence to the people around them. And people say, oh yeah, if everybody says, oh Sondra, you're famous, I go, yeah, everybody that knows me knows my name. Woohoo! As long as my grandchildren know my name, I am good as gold, baby. So, well, you won't forget my name, will you? And I just want to remind you that you were very nice to me on Mother's Day, Josh. I thank you so much for spending Mother's Day with me, because I know you only see me. That was a joke. I know you went to spend Mother's Day with your mother-in-law, and that's totally okay, because I see you all the time. Anyway, I am having a great time having Josh join us and watching him climb his mountain. And, Josh, I think that you're going to do far more greater than I ever dreamed or hoped. And someday I'm going to be up in heaven. Of course, I think once I go to heaven, I'm not going to care a whole lot about earth. But I'm going to say once I'm up there, I know I'm going to be so excited, because I know God is going to use you to do way more than I ever hoped or dreamed. And it's awesome. I like to think that you're starting on my shoulders, which I think that's what all parents can do for their children. So anyway, thanks for coming on and sharing. I had fun. Let's do it some more.
All right.
Okay, so all you out there, go find your mountain. Go be a sphere of influence. Let's do it. Let's kick butt and take names. Okay, I'm Sondra. This is Sondra Heartstone Show. This is Josh, and we will see you next time. Check out Heartstone Network, a place where you'll find feature documentaries, testimonials, and great teachings by many of your favorites. It's a place that we hope will encourage you in your walk with Christ. While there, check out this series we have with Mario Murillo called I Am Not Ashamed. It's a great look into his past and how Jesus has brought him to be the man that he is today. Check us out, HearstStoneNetwork.com.